My mother-in-law announced my miscarriage at dinner, so I exposed her secret affair. She stood up at dinner and announced my miscarriage to the entire table, so I told everyone who she was secretly sleeping. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just realized something very important in that moment. She thought my pain was entertainment, so I stopped protecting her. My name is Emma. I'm 32 years old, married to my husband Brandon for 4 years. 3 weeks ago, I lost a baby I didn't even know I was pregnant with until the day before. We were barely 10 weeks along. We hadn't told anyone. Not friends. Not family. Not even his mother. I took the pregnancy test on a Tuesday morning. I remember sitting on the edge of the bathtub staring at those 2 lines, my hands shaking, my brain trying to catch up with my body. Brandon cried. I laughed. We were terrified and excited at the same time. On Wednesday afternoon, I started bleeding at work. By the time I reached the hospital, it was already over. No dramatic moment. No warning, just quiet paperwork, soft voices, and a doctor who kept saying, "These things happen more often than people realize." The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the silence afterward. We went home to the same apartment, but everything felt hollow. The future we'd imagined for less than 24 hours disappeared without leaving a trace. We agreed on one thing immediately. We were not telling anyone yet, especially not Brandon's mother. Brandon's mother, Patricia, has never understood the concept of boundaries. She's the kind of woman who doesn't knock, because she assumes she's welcome everywhere. She has a key to our apartment for emergencies, which somehow includes rearranging our kitchen, cabinets, and commenting on my laundry detergent choices. She calls Brandon every single morning at exactly 8:12 a.m., and if he doesn't answer by the 3rd ring, she calls again. Then me, then texts, then leaves a voicemail asking if he's still alive. Brandon is her only child, and since his father died, she treats him less like a son and more like emotional property. From the moment I married him, I knew I was competing with her. Not openly, not aggressively, but constantly. Patricia smiles with her mouth, never her eyes. Every compliment comes with a soft little knife hidden inside it. "Oh, Emma, that dress is so brave. I love how confident you are to wear something like that." The first time Brandon brought me home, she looked me up and down and said, "Well?" Brandon always did have eclectic taste, like I was a piece of furniture he found on the curb. So when we decided not to tell anyone about the pregnancy or the miscarriage, it wasn't just about grief. It was about self-preservation. 2 days after we got home from the hospital, Patricia called. Brandon tried to get out of it. He really did. He told her we weren't feeling well, that work had been stressful, that we needed a quiet weekend. Patricia ignored every excuse and steamrolled straight through them. She said she was hosting Sunday dinner. Not asking, announcing, she mentioned she had already bought ingredients for Brandon's favorite pot roast, and then added casually how lonely the house felt lately. Brandon hung up and looked at me, guilt written all over his face. I didn't want to go. My body was still sore. My heart was worse. But I also knew saying no would just delay the inevitable. So that Sunday we drove to her house in silence. Her place looked exactly the same as always. Perfect. Manicured lawn, white colonial exterior, not a leaf out of place, the kind of home that looks like nothing bad has ever happened inside it. When we walked in, I realized immediately we weren't alone. Patricia had invited an audience. Brandon's aunt, his cousin, her husband. 7 people total, seated around the formal dining table with crystal glasses and starched napkins. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a performance. Patricia kissed Brandon's cheek, then turned to me and tilted her head. "Emma, you look tired," she said sweetly. "Are you feeling all right?" I forced a smile and said yes. And that's when I realized something felt very, very wrong. Because Patricia was already watching me like she knew something I didn't. And she was waiting to say it out loud. Dinner started normally. Too normally. People talked about work, traffic, vacations. Forks scraped against plates. Wine glasses clinked. I barely tasted anything. My appetite was gone, replaced by a tight, buzzing pressure in my chest. Brandon's hand found mine under the table, his thumb brushing over my knuckles in that quiet way he does when he knows I'm holding myself together with effort. Patricia sat at the head of the table like a queen presiding over court. She watched everyone carefully, especially me. Every time I looked up, her eyes were already on me, studying, waiting. Halfway through the meal, she cleared her throat. That sound alone was enough to make my stomach drop. "I just want to say something before we eat the roast," she said, folding her hands together, something that's been on my heart. The table slowly went quiet. Even the clinking stopped. Patricia smiled, soft, sympathetic, practiced. "I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about legacy, about grandchildren." My chest tightened so fast it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She continued, her voice warm and syrupy. "Brandon and Emma have been married 4 years now. And as a mother, well, you start to wonder. You start to worry." Brandon stiffened beside me. "Mom." She held up a finger without even looking at him. "I noticed something interesting last Wednesday," she said, turning her gaze directly on me. At the pharmacy. Emma was there, and I happened to see what was in her basket. I felt dizzy. Pregnancy tests, Patricia said lightly. A whole box of them. The room felt like it tilted. Linda gasped softly. Jennifer froze, fork halfway to her mouth. So of course I was thrilled, Patricia went on. I thought maybe, finally, I was getting the grandchild. I've been praying for. Brandon's hand tightened around mine. Mom, stop. Right now. But she didn't. Then, Patricia said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a tragic secret, I ran into one of Emma's coworkers at the grocery store later that week. She mentioned Emma had missed work. Something medical. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. So I put two and two together, Patricia finished. And I realized what must have happened. She turned fully toward me, eyes shining with what looked like pity. Emma, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I'm so sorry for your loss. Silence slammed into the room. Someone dropped their fork. I don't even know who. Patricia reached across the table like she was about to touch my hand. These things happen, she continued. Especially when a woman is stressed. Or doesn't take proper care of herself. That's when something inside me snapped. I stood up so fast my chair screeched across the floor. And for the first time all night, Patricia stopped smiling. I didn't raise my voice. That's what scared everyone the most. My hands were shaking. But my mind felt suddenly clear, cold, sharp, focused in a way grief had stolen from me for weeks. Don't touch me, I said. Patricia's hand froze in midair. I didn't give you permission to share my medical trauma like it was a prayer request. I continued. My voice sounded distant even to me. You found out by spying. You connected dots that were none of your business. And then you decided to announce it at dinner. Brandon stood up beside me. Mom, what you just did was cruel. Patricia blinked rapidly, already shifting strategies. Oh, Emma, I was just trying to be supportive. Everyone here is family. No, I said. Family doesn't ambush you with your worst moment while you're holding a fork. Jennifer looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Linda wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus stared straight ahead like he was watching a car crash and couldn't look away. Patricia's lips tightened. You're being very emotional. That word, emotional. It landed harder than anything else she'd said. You're right, I replied. I am emotional. I lost a baby 3 weeks ago. A baby you had no right to know about. Her face hardened. If you didn't want people to know, maybe you should have been more careful. Brandon exploded. That's enough. But Patricia wasn't done. I'm just saying, she went on calmly. Women who prioritize careers over rest. I laughed. It came out short and sharp, surprising even me. You want to talk about priorities? I said. Because I've been prioritizing keeping my mouth shut for years. The room went still again. Patricia narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? It meant everything. I looked around the table. At the witnesses. At the people who had just watched my pain get turned into dinner conversation. Since we're sharing secrets, I said slowly, I figured it was my turn. Patricia's smile faltered for the first time. And that's when I saw it. Fear. I didn't look at Patricia when I said it. I looked at Brandon, because I needed him to hear it first. You remember Kyle, right? I asked casually, like I was bringing up an old vacation. Patricia stiffened. Brandon frowned. Kyle. Your college friend? Yes, I said. My ex-gay best friend. The one your mom met last year. The one she insisted was such a brave young man. Patricia's wine glass trembled slightly as she lifted it. I turned my gaze back to her. You remember Kyle, don't you? Her smile was still there, but it had gone tight. Brittle. Of course I do. Why? I tilted my head. Because it's funny. You told me you hadn't seen him since that dinner. The air in the room felt heavier, like it was pressing down on everyone's shoulders. But then, I continued, I ran into him at the Oak Ridge Hotel on a Tuesday afternoon. 3 weeks ago. Linda's eyebrows shot up. The Oak Ridge? That's not cheap. No, I agreed. It's not. Patricia set her glass down very carefully. Emma, I think this conversation is inappropriate. I smiled. Small, controlled, deadly calm. Oh, this is inappropriate? I asked. Not announcing my miscarriage to a table full of people without my consent? This is where we draw the line? Brandon looked between us, confused now. Emma, what are you saying? I took a breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'm saying, I replied slowly, that while I was bleeding in a hospital bed, your mother was checking into a hotel with Kyle. Jennifer gasped. Marcus finally turned his head. Patricia stood up so fast her chair screeched across the floor. That is a lie. Is it? I asked. Because Kyle texted me that night. He didn't know what had happened to me yet. He just said, I paused, letting the silence stretch, that he was confused and didn't know how to end things. Brandon's face drained of color. And what things? Patricia's voice rose. Emma, you are sick for making this up. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone. I didn't say anything for months, I said. Because it wasn't my business. Because I didn't want to hurt anyone. Because I didn't want to be cruel. I unlocked the screen. But tonight, I added, meeting her eyes, you decided cruelty was acceptable. I turned the phone toward the table. A hotel receipt. A timestamp. Kyle's name. Patricia stared at it like it was a weapon. Because it was, and she finally understood something very important. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was done protecting her. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator and Patricia's uneven breathing. Then she laughed. A short, sharp laugh that didn't reach her eyes. This is absurd, she said, waving her hand like she was brushing crumbs off the table. You're clearly projecting your grief onto me. I stared at her. She went on, gaining confidence with every word. You've just lost a pregnancy. You're emotional, unstable. Anyone here can see that. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer's mouth opened, then closed. Patricia turned to Brandon, her voice softening instantly. Honey, you know your wife hasn't been herself lately. Trauma does things to people. She's imagining connections that aren't there. That's when something in Brandon snapped. Stop, he said quietly. Patricia froze. Brandon, no, he repeated louder now. You don't get to diagnose my wife to protect yourself. She looked stunned, like she'd been slapped. He stood up slowly, pulling his phone from his pocket. Because if Emma's imagining things, then explain this. He tapped his screen and placed it on the table. A text message from Patricia. Kyle, last night was a mistake. We need to be careful. Brandon can't know. The timestamp was from 2 weeks earlier. The room erupted. Jennifer whispered, oh my God. Marcus muttered, Jesus. Linda pushed her chair back, standing halfway. Patricia, is this true? Patricia's face twisted, not with guilt, but with rage. You went through my phone? She snapped at Brandon. He laughed bitterly. You sent it to my number by accident. You called me Kyle. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. I watched her carefully then, noticing something chilling. She wasn't ashamed. She was angry she got caught. You humiliated me, she hissed, pointing at me. After everything I've done for you. I felt my voice come out calm. Too calm. You announced my miscarriage like it was dinner conversation. She slammed her palm on the table. Because you should have told me. I'm his mother. And I was carrying a child, I said quietly. Past tense. One you don't get to use for attention. Brandon stepped between us physically now. You're done, he said. You don't speak to my wife like that ever again. Patricia's eyes filled, not with tears but fury. If you walk away from me tonight, don't bother coming back. He didn't hesitate. Then I won't. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and relieving at the same time. Patricia had just lost control of the one thing she always relied on. Her son. I thought that was the end of it. I thought once Brandon chose me, once he walked out of that dining room with his jaw set and his hand wrapped tightly around mine, Patricia would retreat, disappear, sulking, silent. I was wrong. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before 7 a.m. First texts from unknown numbers. How could you do this to your husband? Family matters should stay private. Grief doesn't excuse cruelty. Then calls, voicemails from people I barely knew, Brandon's extended relatives, church friends, even one of his coworkers' wives, all saying the same thing, that I had attacked a grieving widow, that I had fabricated an affair out of hormonal instability, that Patricia was heartbroken and deeply concerned about Brandon being manipulated. By noon, Brandon's phone was blowing up too. His Aunt Linda called crying, Your mother says Emma ambushed her, that she's worried about your mental health. I felt sick. Patricia hadn't gone quiet. She'd gone public. By that evening, Brandon's cousin forwarded us a Facebook post. Patricia's Facebook post. No names. No details. Just a carefully written essay about the cruelty of false accusations, a daughter-in-law consumed by grief, and a mother losing her son to lies. Hundreds of comments, heart emojis, prayer hands, people praising her strength. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. She's rewriting reality, I whispered. Brandon's face went gray. She's trying to isolate us. And then came the final blow. An email. From a family lawyer. Subject line, concern for Brandon's well-being. Patricia was requesting a formal wellness check, claiming I was emotionally unstable, that I had suffered a traumatic loss, that I might be exerting undue influence over her son. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. She's trying to paint me as dangerous, I said. Brandon looked at me, eyes burning with something I'd never seen before, anger mixed with resolve. No, he said. She's trying to get me back. That night, as we sat in the dark living room, I realized something chilling. Patricia didn't care about the miscarriage. She didn't care about the truth. She didn't even care about her reputation. She only cared about control, and she was willing to destroy me to keep it. But she made one mistake. She assumed I would stay quiet. She assumed grief made me weak. She assumed I wouldn't fight back. She was about to learn how wrong she was. By the time Monday morning rolled around, I knew I couldn't trust anyone, not Patricia, not even Brandon's extended family who'd been duped into her web of lies. I had to protect myself, and the only way to do that was to document everything. I started small. Screenshots of texts, calls, emails, anything even slightly related to Patricia's smear campaign. Every Facebook comment, every vague WhatsApp forward. I made a folder on my laptop titled Evidence Patricia. It felt clinical, like I was building a case in a courtroom, which I realized I probably was. Then I remembered the night she tried to guilt me in the dining room, that smirk as she watched me flinch. I knew she thrived on control, on making people squirm. If I wanted to survive this, I couldn't let her manipulate me emotionally anymore. I had to think strategically. I also started recording conversations with Brandon, carefully under the guise of checking in after work. I knew he needed to remain on my side, and I had to prove that her lies weren't influencing him. Every conversation that mentioned Patricia's posts, emails, or attempts to meddle was logged. By Wednesday, I noticed something. Patricia's attacks weren't slowing down, they were escalating. She had started messaging my work contacts, claiming I was unstable and unreliable after the miscarriage. People I barely knew were asking Brandon if I was okay. As if my personal life was a spectacle. Sunday evening arrived. The kind of quiet before a storm. I knew Patricia would be hosting her usual family check-in dinner, but this time I wasn't coming as a victim. I arrived with Brandon by my side, my phone packed with screenshots, recordings, and a meticulously compiled timeline. Patricia greeted us with her usual syrupy smile, the one that used to make me flinch. "Emma, Brandon, so glad you're here," she said, voice dripping with fake warmth. But this time I didn't feel intimidated. I had evidence. I had facts. And I had my husband supporting me. The dinner started normally. Small talk. Brandon's aunt commenting on the flower arrangement. The cousin talking about their trip to Europe. But I had already set my plan in motion. As Patricia reached to serve the pot roast, I cleared my throat and said loudly, "Before we eat, there's something important I need everyone to know." Her smile faltered. "Oh, what is it, Emma?" I held up my phone, the screen showing the text, thread where she'd publicly humiliated me about my miscarriage. "Patricia, this is what you shared about me last week," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "You announced my miscarriage at dinner. To the entire table. To people who had no right to know." Gasps around the table. Brandon's eyes widened. Even her own family looked shocked. Patricia's voice tightened. "Emma, that's private family discussion." I cut her off. "Family? Or was it entertainment for you?" I tapped another screenshot. This one showing the messages she sent to her friends, spreading rumors about me at work. "You've been manipulating everyone, spreading lies about me and trying to control my marriage. And I have proof." Her hands trembled slightly. The carefully curated mask of perfection cracked. I didn't stop. I revealed the affair she'd been hiding for months. Someone completely unexpected. Someone close to the family. The room went silent. Forks clattered. Eyes darted around, trying to process what they'd just heard. Patricia's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing without words. Then Brandon spoke, his voice strong, almost shaking with anger. "Mom, enough. This stops now." I showed the last piece of evidence. Screenshots where she tried to gaslight Brandon, trying to twist our miscarriage into something to guilt him into compliance. The silence was deafening. "Finally," Patricia stammered, trying to defend herself. But the room had already turned. Her credibility was shattered in a single evening. She had weaponized my grief for her ego, and now everyone saw it. I felt a surge of relief mixed with exhaustion. I had faced her publicly. I had reclaimed my narrative. And for the first time since the miscarriage, I felt like I had power over my life again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't fully over. Patricia might try to retaliate. But I had learned something crucial. When someone uses your pain against you, the ultimate weapon is truth. And I wasn't holding back anymore. The room stayed silent for what felt like forever. Patricia's eyes darted around, desperately seeking an ally. But no one met her gaze. Even her loyal friends who had come over for the dinner looked stunned and uncertain. The aura of control she had wielded for decades was gone in minutes. Brandon reached for my hand under the table. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "You didn't deserve any of this." I squeezed back, a mix of relief and lingering anger coursing through me. For the first time since the miscarriage, I felt seen. Not just by Brandon, but by everyone in the room. Patricia tried to speak, to spin her story, but every word fell flat. Her carefully crafted facade crumbled as I calmly laid out each lie, each cruel message, each manipulation. I had anticipated every possible excuse, and nothing could save her credibility. The family murmured among themselves. My revelations had forced them to confront what they had ignored for too long. Patricia's toxic behavior. By the end of the night, she was quiet, cornered, and powerless. The very thing she had tried to use to dominate the room, fear, shame, control, had turned against her. Brandon and I left that dinner with a sense of liberation. We held hands in the car, breathing deeply, knowing that the silence and the secrecy of the past weeks were finally broken. We had reclaimed our narrative and with it our peace. Over the next few weeks, Patricia tried to reach out, calls, messages, even letters, but we didn't respond. Brandon blocked her on social media. I set boundaries in our home. Every attempt she made to manipulate or guilt us simply bounced off. Powerless against the truth in our united front, it wasn't easy. Healing from both the miscarriage and the emotional abuse took time. But every day I felt stronger. I started sharing my story with close friends, finding a community of support, and realizing that grief doesn't have to be endured in silence, and no one has the right to weaponize it. By the end, Patricia became the cautionary tale. Her reputation, carefully curated for years, was publicly questioned. Brandon and I rebuilt our home as a safe, loving space where respect was non-negotiable. I learned the hardest lesson of all. Pain can either break you or fuel you, and I chose to rise. Even months later, the memory of that dinner stayed with me, not as a source of shame, but as a turning point. The moment I refused to let someone else dictate my grief, my life, or my story. And that, more than anything, was worth every confrontation, every awkward silence, and every tear shed along the way.